Welcome everyone to this inspiring speech. I'm truly glad you're here. Before we begin, don't forget to join and support our growing community by taking membership in my channel, The Veteran Vault, where powerful ideas and meaningful discussions await you. The ramp drops, and suddenly, the ocean behind you doesn't matter anymore. In front of you is fire, smoke, and a beach covered with the cost of war, men, machines, and moments that will never come back. You don't think about fear. You don't think about tomorrow. You think about one thing: moving forward. Because on that day, on that island, standing still meant you were already gone. I grew up in Marion County, in a small, quiet rural place called Quiet Dell. Life wasn't easy. When I was just 11 years old, my father passed away, leaving my mother to run a dairy farm in West Virginia on her own. There wasn't much room for opportunity, and getting any kind of endorsement or support for a different path felt nearly impossible. Still, I had made up my mind. I came back home with one clear purpose: to join the United States Marine Corps. At that time, it felt like war was inevitable, and I believed that if it came, it could threaten everything we valued: our freedom, our way of life, our future. I wanted to be part of the people who stood up to protect it. But there was one problem. I was only 17 and my mother refused to sign the papers that would allow me to enlist. So I had no choice but to wait. When October came and I finally turned 18, I didn't waste any time. By November, I walked into the Marine Corps recruiting office, ready to sign up. The recruiter barely looked at the paperwork I had filled out. He looked at me instead, up and down, and said, "I can't take you. You're too short." I stood there at 5'6", and just like that, I was turned away. So I went back home to the farm. I had already decided that if I couldn't be a Marine, I wasn't going to join anything else. 2 of my brothers had already been drafted into the Army, and I didn't feel drawn to that. I wanted to wear the Marine uniform. Nothing else felt right. That was November of 1942. Then, early the next year, things changed. The Marine Corps lowered the height requirement. Suddenly, men who didn't meet the old standard had a chance. Not long after that, the same recruiter showed up at the farm looking for me. He asked if I was still interested. My answer hadn't changed. I said yes without hesitation. I went back into town with him, signed the papers, and before long, I was on my way. Once we were aboard the ship, they gathered us and showed us a board with the shape of an island, Iwo Jima. The outline looked strange, almost like a pork chop. We were told that our division would serve as a reserve for 2 other Marine divisions already assigned to the operation. The expectation was that we might not even leave the ship. We were there just in case. They also told us the campaign would be short, 3 to 5 days at most. That's what everyone believed at the time. The truth is, we didn't really know what we were walking into. There was no real intelligence about the island. We had no idea there were around 22,000 Japanese soldiers waiting there. We didn't know about the massive network of tunnels dug beneath the surface, stretching for miles. None of that had reached us. So when we arrived near Iwo Jima, we stayed out on the water, waiting to see if we would be needed, not fully understanding that what lay ahead was far more intense, far more dangerous, and far more enduring than anything we had been told. That first night, after the beach had already taken so many lives, word came down that we would be going in the next morning, February 20th. When the time came, we climbed into the Higgins boats and headed towards shore. But instead of landing, we spent the entire day circling out in the water, waiting for the signal to move in. It never came. The beach was completely jammed, no space, no opening. The Marines already there were pinned down, and there was simply nowhere for us to land. So we turned back and spent another night on the ship. The following day we made our approach again. Inside those Higgins boats, everyone stayed low, crouched down, trying to stay protected. You couldn't see anything ahead on the way in, just the sound of the engine and the tension building in your chest. Then the ramp dropped. What was in front of us didn't look like anything I had imagined. The beach was covered in destruction, wrecked vehicles, damaged tanks, broken equipment scattered everywhere. And among it all were bodies. It was overwhelming. One image, though, has stayed with me ever since and never left my mind. Off to my left, the fallen Marines had been wrapped in their ponchos, something we all carried for the rain, and they were laid out in rows along the edge of the beach, stacked together. I saw that, and it's something I've carried with me for the rest of my life. We pushed forward through what they called black sand, but it wasn't really sand. It was more like fine volcanic ash, loose and unstable. Every step felt like you were sinking. It wouldn't pack down, wouldn't hold shape. Trying to dig into it was useless. It would just slide right back in. Movement was slow, exhausting, and everything around us felt chaotic. Most of the way, we crawled. Step by step, we worked our way up until we reached the first airfield. At the time, we didn't fully understand the bigger plan, but later it became clear. We were meant to push across that airfield and act as the spearhead, cutting the island in two. That wasn't something we knew going in. We just followed orders and moved forward. When we reached the airfield, the ground changed. It was no longer that loose ash. It was solid dirt. For the first time, we could actually dig in, so we started working on foxholes as quickly as possible. Then suddenly, something shifted around us. Marines nearby started shouting about a flag. Some of them stood up and began firing their weapons into the air. Not at the enemy, just straight up. Everyone's attention turned back toward Mount Suribachi. We were about 1,000 yards up the beach from it. I turned to look, trying to understand what was happening, and that's when I saw it. The flag already raised, stretched out in the wind, fully visible. It was the first time I saw it, and in that moment, I did the same as the others. I stood up and fired my weapon into the air too. It wasn't planned. It was just something you felt. A release, maybe. A shared moment. As for how I ended up operating a flamethrower, it wasn't something I had planned. When we hit the beach, I had 6 Marines assigned with me, spread across different companies, A, B, and C. But after the landing, they were gone. I never saw them again. I don't know if they were killed or wounded, and to this day I still don't know what happened to them. That left me as the only flamethrower operator in C Company. At the time, I was serving as an acting sergeant, mostly handling supply, making sure units had the demolition gear and flamethrowers they needed. But with the others gone, that role changed instantly. Our commanding officer, Captain Beck, who would later become a major, called for a meeting with all the non-commissioned officers. Technically, as a corporal, I wasn't included. I wasn't planning to go, but my first sergeant made it clear that I was needed there. So we gathered inside a large shell crater. Right there, under constant threat, he started laying out a plan. We had been stopped cold by a line of pillboxes protecting the airfield. There were too many of them, and they were positioned perfectly. The Japanese were fortified and hidden, while we were exposed out in the open. Every attempt to move forward was met with heavy resistance. Standing there in that crater, we knew something had to change. We had to figure out a way through those defenses, or we weren't going anywhere. A lot of what was being discussed in that crater went over my head. They were talking strategy, movement, coordination, things that didn't really mean much to me in that moment. I was just focused on what was right in front of me. Then, in the middle of it, the commanding officer turned to me and asked something along the lines of whether I thought I could use the flamethrower against those pillboxes. Up to that point, I don't even know if that approach had really been tried. But when he asked me, I gave a simple answer. I said I'd try. That was enough. He assigned 4 Marines to go with me, men whose job was to cover me while I moved in close enough to use the flamethrower. On top of that, I picked 1 Marine to assist me with explosives. We called that role a pole charge man. If I managed to clear out a pillbox with flame, his job was to rush in right after and place a demolition charge to make sure nothing inside was left alive. But war doesn't give you much time. Not long after we started, he was hit, shot straight through the helmet. Somehow, the bullet didn't go through his head, but it knocked him out of action. He was dazed, shaken badly, and couldn't continue. After that, I just kept going, doing what I had to do. Once we moved past the first airfield, we ran straight into a heavy line of pillboxes. These weren't makeshift defenses. They were solid, reinforced concrete. The enemy inside had protection, while we were completely exposed. The only way to reach them was to get up, run forward, drop down, and repeat that again and again, trying to close the distance. The only vulnerable point on those structures was a small opening in the front. the firing slot they used to shoot at us. The rest of the pillbox was sealed tight. We tried pushing forward multiple times, but every attempt cost us men. Too many were getting hit, too many going down. Eventually, we had to pull back each time. So when I took up the flamethrower and went after those positions, I wasn't doing anything heroic in my mind. I was doing exactly what I had been trained to do. Other Marines had taught me how to use that weapon, and without that training, there's no way I could have done any of it. One by one, I focused on those pillboxes. In total, there were 7 directly in front of us that I managed to engage. Whether it was clearing them out or neutralizing the enemy inside, I didn't think much beyond the task itself. I was just moving from one to the next, staying alive, staying focused. Later on, I was told something I didn't even realize at the time. By taking out those positions, it opened a path, a narrow lane that allowed our forces to finally move forward. Once we broke through that line of pillboxes, the advantage shifted. Those structures were designed to fire forward, not backward. So once we got past them, they couldn't effectively stop us anymore. That breakthrough gave us momentum. It allowed us to keep advancing and continue the mission. But in the middle of all that, things were so disorganized that we barely knew who was who. Units were mixed, communication was limited, and most of us only recognized the men in our immediate group. I remember calling over 2 Marines to come with me. I didn't know their names. I had never seen them before. But in that situation, when you give an order, Marines follow it. They came with me without hesitation. That's just how it was. Both of those men were killed that day while helping cover me. They gave their lives doing exactly what they were asked to do, protecting someone they didn't even know. That's something that stays with you. It changes you in a way that nothing else can. That day, everything shifted for me. I became someone I had never imagined I would be. Before all of this, I had no idea what I was capable of, what I would face, or what it would demand from me. And through it all, I never allowed myself to think that I wouldn't make it out alive. Not even for a moment. If that thought started to creep in, I pushed it away immediately. I believed, deep down, that I had to hold on to that certainty, that I was going to survive. Because without that belief, I don't think I could have kept going. From the very beginning, I held on to one thought stronger than anything else, that I was going to make it back home. I was engaged to a wonderful woman, and I had already made up my mind that I was going to marry her. That belief stayed with me through everything. I never allowed myself to think otherwise. The moment doubt even tried to enter my mind, I pushed it out. I convinced myself that survival wasn't a question, it was a certainty. And that belief carried me forward. When the war was over, and I was told I would be receiving the Medal of Honor, I honestly didn't understand what that meant. I may have heard the words mentioned somewhere along the way, maybe even from a commanding officer, but it didn't register. I had never seen one before. I didn't know what it truly stood for. Even on the day it was presented to me by President Truman, I still didn't fully grasp it. I stood there not really understanding why I had been chosen, especially when I could think of so many Marines around me who had done just as much, men who never made it back home. That thought never left me. Why me, and not them? Receiving that honor wasn't something that felt simple or easy to accept. It came with a weight that I had to learn how to carry. Suddenly, I was no longer just another Marine. I was seen as something more, a public figure, and that was never something I had imagined for myself. My life changed in ways I hadn't expected, and I had to adjust to a path I never planned to walk. The generation I was part of, the World War II generation, was built differently. We were raised with a strong sense of duty, a deep respect for our country, and a belief in something bigger than ourselves. Love for our nation and the value of freedom were not just ideas, they were part of who we were. We were taught these things from a young age, in school, at home, and in everyday life. I still remember being made to learn and recite the Gettysburg Address over and over again. At the time, it felt like just another assignment, but as I grew older, I began to understand its meaning. It spoke about sacrifice, about people who gave their lives so that others could continue to live free. That message stayed with me. What makes this moment so powerful isn't just the chaos of the battlefield, it's what it does to the human mind. When that ramp drops, there's no gradual adjustment, no time to process what you're seeing. You're instantly thrown into a reality where survival depends on how fast you can move, how well you can control fear, and how quickly you can act without hesitation. The senses overload at once, the sound of gunfire, the smell of smoke, the sight of destruction. And yet, somehow, your mind narrows everything down to one simple objective: keep going. That kind of environment strips away everything unnecessary. You're not thinking about who you were before, or even who you'll be after. Identity becomes very small in that moment. You're not a son, not a friend, not even really an individual. You're part of something larger, moving with the people beside you, relying on them just as much as they rely on you. Trust becomes immediate and absolute. You don't have the luxury of questioning it. What's often overlooked is how unprepared most soldiers are for the reality compared to what they were told. Many believed operations like Iwo Jima would be short, controlled, even predictable. Instead, they walked into one of the most intense and unforgiving battles of the war. That gap between expectation and reality creates a kind of shock that forces rapid mental adaptation. Some freeze, some break, but many push through, not because they aren't afraid, but because stopping isn't an option. There's also a deep psychological shift that happens when you see loss up close. It's no longer abstract. It's no longer numbers or reports. It's people you stood next to moments ago. That changes how you move, how you think, and how you carry yourself. For some, it creates hesitation. For others, it creates a sharper focus, almost like a switch flips, and everything becomes about completing the mission, so those losses mean something. The role of weapons like the flamethrower adds another layer to this. It's not just physically demanding, it's mentally heavy. You're being asked to move closer than most, to confront fortified positions head-on, knowing you're a primary target. It requires a different kind of resolve, not reckless bravery, but controlled determination. And often, the people who step into that role don't see themselves as heroes. They see themselves as doing the job they were trained to do, nothing more. Another important aspect is how leadership works in those moments. Orders are given, but they're often interpreted in real time by individuals on the ground. Decisions happen fast, sometimes without full information. A single action, like taking out a pillbox or opening a path, can change the direction of an entire operation. Yet the person doing it may not even realize the larger impact until much later, if ever. Then there's what happens after. Surviving something like that doesn't mean it ends. The memories stay sharp, sometimes clearer than anything else in life. Certain images don't fade. They become part of you. And at the same time, there's often a quiet struggle with recognition, especially when honors are given. Many veterans feel a sense of conflict, knowing that others who gave everything are not there to be recognized. At its core, this topic isn't just about a battle. It's about transformation. Ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances, forced to act beyond what they thought they were capable of. It's about resilience, sacrifice, and the reality that courage is often not a loud, dramatic thing. It's a decision made in a split second to keep moving forward when everything around you is telling you not to. And that's something I believe people today should never forget. Freedom is not something that just exists on its own. It was earned through sacrifice, and it can be lost if we take it for granted. If we ever let it slip away, it's not something we can easily get back. That's the reality of it. The speech powerfully emphasizes the importance of unity, determination, and purpose in overcoming challenges and achieving success. It reminds us that true progress comes from collective effort, strong values, and unwavering belief in our goals. The message inspires us to take responsibility, act with courage, and strive for a better future. Ultimately, it leaves us with a sense of motivation to turn words into meaningful action.